Continuing with episode 10, the younger sister of the king protests because she's not allowed to go out. She feels it's unfair since her own brother freely roams around. The servant informs her that it is indeed the king's duty. However, the king's sister points out that her brother used to be an adventurer. Yet, when she expresses her desire to become one, her brother prohibits her. Suddenly, the king's sister recalls that the servant's brother is a merchant. The servant reveals that her brother goes out when the gates open in the morning, engages in trade, and then returns. Coincidentally, as they converse, the king seems to have returned from his journey. The king's sister hurries to welcome her brother. It appears that she acts cheerful to conceal her intention of sneaking out tonight. Meanwhile, Goblin Slayer's party finally enters the capital. They escort Sword Maiden to her destination first. Upon arrival, Sword Maiden is promptly greeted by two young nuns there. Having completed their escort, Goblin Slayer and the others now need to decide where to stay. Sword Maiden suggests they stay at the temple, and they all readily agree. Before that, Goblin Slayer mentions wanting to investigate something in the library. Sword Maiden gladly offers to accompany him. However, the dwarf declines, stating that the first thing they should do is eat. Since Goblin Slayer has no objections, he joins them for a meal. Sword Maiden seems saddened by this. Meanwhile, Priestess says she wants to visit a certain place first. Goblin Slayer is a bit concerned about Priestess wandering alone. Eventually, the elf decides to accompany Priestess as well. Thus, their group is split into two parts. Goblin Slayer, the dwarf, and the lizardman headed straight to the tavern after being informed of a good place by Sword Maiden. The dwarf didn't expect he could recommend a place like this. The lizardman had heard that Sword Maiden used to be an adventurer, so it's reasonable that she knows about places like this. While eating, the dwarf brought up Goblin Slayer's recent melancholy. He could easily sense that something was bothering him, especially since they had been together for a year. Finally, Goblin Slayer shared his concerns. Lately, he couldn't focus on exterminating goblins. Despite the enjoyable travels they had recently, he feels guilty for having fun when goblins are likely still roaming. He believes it's his duty as a Goblin Slayer. Suddenly, the dwarf asked if Goblin Slayer knows how to make a sword. He answered that he doesn't know. Then, the dwarf explained that a sword must be heated, forged, cooled, and forged again. All these steps are essential. This also applies to people. A soft sword is flexible but weak in a fight. A hard sword is sharp but prone to break. Based on this explanation, the dwarf suggested that Goblin Slayer figure out for himself what a good sword is. The lizardman added his opinion, stating that not everyone can do everything. Even creatures in this world can't live as they wish, especially intelligent beings capable of speech. Whether troubled or confused, the important thing is to just live. That's the meaning of life. Meanwhile, Priestess and the elf went to a graveyard. It turns out, Priestess wanted to pay her respects at the tomb of a witch girl, her former party member. She prayed and shared her journey so far, mentioning that she continues to exterminate goblins. She also encountered her younger brother. After expressing what she wanted to say, Priestess left. The elf, waiting nearby, then asked whose grave it was. Priestess answered that it was the grave of her old friend. When the elf inquired about what kind of friend she was, Priestess realized she didn't know her that well. She couldn't answer the question. The elf understood, acknowledging that there are moments like this. Seeing Priestess in such a gloomy state, the elf decided to take her for some fun. The two of them went to an expansive bathhouse. Although the building was primarily for bathing, it had other facilities as well. There were sports areas, massage services, snack spots, and even drinks. All these amenities could be accessed by paying only the bathing fee. While in the building's hall, Priestess felt like someone was watching her. The person wore warrior armor, and their face was not entirely visible due to a hooded cloak. After paying the bathing fee, they headed to the changing area. The elf noticed that Priestess was still wearing the chainmail she had purchased right after meeting Goblin Slayer. For her, that armor held sentimental value. After that, they relaxed in the bathhouse. Despite its spaciousness, the water remained warm, and the place even offered steam baths. Intrigued, the elf decided to check out the steam baths. Not long after that, Priestess was startled when a girl suddenly greeted her. The girl had blonde hair and blue eyes, resembling Priestess. However, her hair was much shorter. As seen before, this girl was the king's sister. She wanted to make sure that Priestess was a hero. When asked, Priestess thought the girl wanted to recruit party members. She mentioned that she was already part of a party. The girl disagreed with that statement. Confused about what the girl truly wanted, Priestess was then asked about the equipment she used. Her equipment was quite ordinary: Priestess robe, staff, and chainmail. The girl thanked her for the reference. Priestess speculated that the girl might want to become an adventurer. If so, she suggested shopping for preparations first. Right after the girl left, the elf returned from the steam bath. After that, they decided to finish bathing and then go to the changing area. While there, Priestess became hysterical because her clothes were missing. As a priestess, it was impossible for someone to mistakenly take them. An employee there quickly confirmed this with a colleague. Indeed, an employee had seen someone wearing a priestess robe leave the bathhouse. In the basket next to where a priestess had put her clothes, she realized her wallet was there. Meanwhile, her own basket contained warrior armor. Priestess then remembered the person who had been watching her in the hall earlier. That meant the girl who had just left had targeted her from the beginning. Priestess felt deeply saddened by the theft, especially for her chainmail. That chainmail was the first time she was praised by Goblin Slayer. The elf felt guilty for taking her to the bathhouse and promised it would retrieve her belongings. Priestess and the elf had returned to the temple. The elf had also explained the incident to Priestess. Currently, Priestess was sleeping, accompanied by the elf, dwarf, and lizard man. Only Goblin Slayer was absent. Sword Maiden then entered Goblin Slayer's room and suggested that he should comfort Priestess. By the way, Sword Maiden came to deliver the book Goblin Slayer had requested. It was already too late to take Goblin Slayer to the library. Responding to Sword Maiden's advice, Goblin Slayer said that an item could indeed go missing. When he was a child, he was promised his father's dagger when he grew up. Goblin Slayer admired the dagger with its eagle-shaped hilt. However, he didn't know where the dagger was now. Coincidentally, Sword Maiden would go to the palace tomorrow. She would have a meeting with the king. Since she had known the king for a long time, Sword Maiden would discuss Priestess's issue there if possible. The next day, Sword Maiden was already at the palace for a meeting. Firstly, the king wanted to discuss the fallen star stone that fell on the sacred mountain. One of the meeting members, a dark-skinned man, reported that astrologers claimed it was an accidentally fallen evil star, so it wasn't fate but rather a coincidence. The king then inquired about the current condition of the sacred mountain itself. Someone with a half-dog race reported that the sacred mountain was still unfit for climbing. A man with white hair also stated that it would be challenging to deploy troops to the sacred mountain. However, if something appeared, they could attack it first. No monster could enter here. But the half-dog warned that they should be cautious as he had come to the foot of the mountain and felt something unfamiliar. That meant it was time for the hero to intervene. They would discuss this matter after the hero arrived. Additionally, the king wanted to hear about the city situation during his absence. At that moment, Sword Maiden reported the incident involving Priestess. The king was willing to investigate it. Moving on to the next topic, the king wanted to know the condition of the adventurer training grounds. Unexpectedly, the one reporting on this was the noble fencer, the noble girl who had once been saved by Goblin Slayer. They built facilities to train adventurers. Noble Fencer reported that the community still struggled with the idea of having to learn before becoming adventurers. While the meeting was still ongoing, the servant of the king's younger sibling entered abruptly. She appeared panicked, bringing her younger brother into the meeting room as well. She informed everyone that this morning, a priestess requested to be escorted to the north. On the way, they were attacked by goblins and overwhelmed. She wanted to escape with a horse and invited the priestess, but the priestess insisted on fighting the goblins. In the end, the priestess was taken by the goblins. The servant's younger brother returned to the capital to seek help. He didn't know that the priestess was actually the younger sister of the king. After hearing the story, the king couldn't hastily send aid. Moreover, his younger sister turned out to be the thief discussed by Sword Maiden. Currently, he needed adventurers he could trust. Since they were attacked by goblins in the north, specifically on the road to the sacred mountain, Sword Maiden believed the goblins were nesting in the Death Labyrinth. If they were indeed nesting there, the king now needed adventurers who could keep secrets, were reliable, skilled, and capable of exploring the labyrinth's depths. The meeting members suggested that Sword Maiden save the king's sister. However, just hearing the word goblin made her feel scared. Right at that moment, Noble Fencer reported that Sword Maiden's friends were granted permission to enter the meeting room. Sword Maiden felt relieved with the arrival of Goblin Slayer. Upon hearing someone mention goblins, Goblin Slayer was ready to undertake the extermination mission.